The rain had just stopped when Armin, a 12-year-old boy with eyes too old for his age, found himself staring at the gleaming gates of the enormous mansion. His heart pounded in his chest, and his hands trembled, not from fear, but from the impossible decision he had to make. He had been told he could earn a small sum for performing a dance in front of someone important, but the rules were strict: no mistakes, no distractions, and no chance for second attempts. One misstep, and not only would he lose the money, but he could be thrown out in shame. Armin was small, wiry, and full of quiet determination. He was used to surviving in the crowded streets of Karachi, dodging vendors, and finding coins dropped by careless passers-by. But this was different. This was a mansion filled with polished floors, sparkling chandeliers, and a world that seemed light years away from the alleyways he knew. Inside waited a little girl who could not move, whose family's wealth and power seemed untouchable. And he was just a poor boy with a few fancy dance moves, a battered pair of shoes, and a courage that was both foolish and fierce. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "I can do this. I have to." But then came the second thought, the one that made his chest tighten: what if she laughed at me? What if I fail her? What if everything I have ever worked for is crushed in one moment? Could one small boy really bring joy to someone living in a world he could never hope to join? Armin stepped forward, his bare feet sliding slightly on the wet driveway. He had no guide, no plan, no rehearsals in front of the rich and powerful. And yet, a tiny spark inside him told him that sometimes, courage was not about knowing the steps, it was about believing that the steps themselves could lead to miracles. The sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows of the grand hall, casting golden beams onto the polished marble floors. The air smelled faintly of roses and freshly polished wood, and the sound of distant classical music filled the silence. A hush lay over the room, broken only by the soft hum of the central air and the occasional shuffle of staff moving unseen behind the heavy curtains. Inside, sitting on a custom-made wheelchair with cushions and a canopy of silk draping around her, was Hannah, a girl of 8 years whose body betrayed her spirit. Paralyzed from a rare neurological condition, her eyes were the only part of her that seemed alive, eyes that could pierce through any illusion and see the truth beneath. Today, they seemed restless, almost expectant, as if they sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. Beside her, her mother, Mrs. Arzu Khan, stood tall, immaculate in a designer outfit, her posture perfect, her expression composed, but her eyes betrayed worry. She had heard that someone from the street would perform for her daughter. She did not know what to expect. Her husband, Mr. Adil Khan, a billionaire known for his sharp business mind and cold demeanor, sat in the corner, reading a tablet, his face betraying nothing, but the faint furrow of his brow hinted at curiosity. Armin was led into the hall by a polite assistant, his small feet making soft sounds against the marble. The assistant whispered something in his ear, and he nodded silently, his heart beating like a drum. He stepped into the center of the hall, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. The chandeliers sparkled above, the music softened, and all eyes, some curious, some skeptical, fell upon him. He took a deep breath, recalling every dance step he had ever learned in the narrow lanes and cramped rooftops of his neighborhood. He closed his eyes for just a second, imagining the streets of his home, imagining the faces of the people who had encouraged him, who had believed in his talent when no one else did. And then, opening his eyes, he began to move. At first, his steps were cautious, almost tentative. The silence in the hall was heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. But gradually, his movements became confident, flowing, full of life. He leapt and twirled, spun and dipped, the music carrying him across the marble floor. Every gesture was an expression of hope, a prayer, a silent promise that joy could be found even in the darkest places. Hannah's eyes widened. A faint smile tugged at her lips, the first sign of emotion she had shown in months. Her small hands twitched in the air, a shadow of movement that reflected the dance itself. For Mrs. Khan, it was impossible not to notice the change. The rigid atmosphere of the room seemed to soften, the air lighter, almost magical. Mr. Khan lowered his tablet, his sharp eyes unable to look away. There was something in this boy, something raw, genuine, and unpolished, that had already broken through layers of wealth, power, and expectation. But then, halfway through his performance, something unexpected happened. The music stuttered, a sudden crackling echo through the speakers, and Armin stumbled. For a moment, panic flashed in his mind. Every second counted. Every mistake could be fatal. Would he fall and embarrass himself? Would the little girl lose the smile he had just brought? Would the opportunity vanish before it had truly begun? Armin closed his eyes again, took a trembling breath, and made a choice that would change everything. He did not stop. He did not pause. Instead, he improvised. He let his body flow naturally, letting the rhythm of his heart guide him rather than the notes of the music. He danced as he had always danced, without expectation, without fear, with pure, unfiltered soul. The room fell into a spellbound silence. Hannah laughed, a clear, joyful sound that echoed through the hall, bouncing off the chandeliers and polished walls. Her hands moved, reaching out, trembling with excitement. Mrs. Khan's eyes filled with tears, and even Mr. Khan's cold facade cracked for the briefest moment, revealing a hint of astonishment and pride. The performance ended with Armin kneeling on the floor, his chest heaving, sweat shining on his forehead. Silence held the hall for a heartbeat, and then a sound erupted: applause. But it was not just polite clapping. It was raw, emotional, heartfelt, a mixture of relief, joy, and admiration. Armin looked up and saw Hannah clapping her hands, her laughter mingling with the tears on her mother's face. Even Mr. Khan stood, slowly, his hands coming together in an acknowledgement that Armin had not only entertained but had done something far more profound. He had touched a heart thought unreachable. The assistant stepped forward to congratulate him, but Armin's eyes were fixed on Hannah. And then, something astonishing happened. Hannah whispered, barely audible, "Dance again, please." Armin's lips parted in shock. Could she really speak? Had she found her voice, even just for a moment, inspired by a stranger's courage? And as he prepared to take her request seriously, he felt a tug in his chest, a whisper in his soul: this moment was only the beginning. Outside, the city continued its usual chaos, unaware that inside the mansion, something extraordinary had happened. But as Armin would soon discover, the small act of courage and kindness had set off a chain of events that would reach far beyond the polished walls of wealth. There were forces, both seen and unseen, that would challenge him, reward him, and ultimately test the very essence of who he was. The mansion, once silent and cold, now hummed with a quiet tension. Armin had barely caught his breath when Mrs. Khan stepped forward, her eyes still shimmering with tears. You have a gift, child," she said softly, almost whispering, as if speaking louder might shatter the fragile moment. "Hannah hasn't smiled like that in months. How did you do it?" Armin shook his head, unsure what to say. Words felt small compared to what had just happened. He had danced with everything inside him, but he hadn't known it would awaken so much more. I just danced," he replied simply. His voice was hoarse, but his heart beat with a mix of pride and fear. Pride because he had made Hannah happy, fear because he had no idea what would come next. Hannah's small hand trembled as she reached out toward him, and for the first time, Armin realized that this little girl, confined to a wheelchair, had a spirit as fierce and unyielding as his own. He felt a sudden bond, fragile yet powerful, as if they had recognized each other's courage. But while the moment seemed perfect, the shadows of reality loomed close. Outside the polished walls of the mansion, the city had its own rhythm, and not all of it was kind. Armin had a home, but it was barely a shelter. He had a family, his mother, who worked double shifts as a maid, and his younger sister, Aisha, who looked up to him with wide, trusting eyes. The money he earned could feed them for days, but only if he survived the scrutiny of the wealthy. Only if he navigated the dangerous waters of a world that wasn't designed for someone like him. Mrs. Khan's voice broke his thoughts. "I want you to stay," she said, almost too quickly, as if the words themselves frightened her. "Hannah, she needs you." We need you." Her gaze flicked toward her husband, whose expression was unreadable. But Armin saw the tension in his shoulders, the faint narrowing of his eyes, and he understood. There were rules here, hidden, invisible walls that he would have to cross carefully. I can't stay," Armin said, trying to keep his voice firm. "I have to go home. My family," he stopped himself. He didn't want to seem weak or needy in front of these powerful people. Yet the pull to stay, to continue seeing Hannah smile, tugged at him like a storm. Hannah's lips curled into a small, pleading smile. "Please, don't go," she whispered. Her voice, though faint, carried an urgent strength. Armin froze. He had never been asked for anything like this before. The streets demanded survival, not loyalty or courage. But here, in this room of gold and silk, he felt something he had never known: responsibility, not to himself, but to another. Mr. Khan cleared his throat. His deep, commanding voice broke the tension. "If he stays on my terms," he said sharply. "Do you understand that, Armin?" The boy nodded, unsure what exactly those terms would be. He had already risked everything by stepping onto this stage. Could he now risk staying in a world he barely understood? The next days blurred into a whirlwind of adjustments. Armin was given a small room in the mansion's servant quarters, a surprisingly clean and comfortable space compared to the cramped apartment he had left behind. He spent hours with Hannah, teaching her simple dances she could mimic with her hands and upper body. He laughed more than he had in months, and for the first time, he felt the strange warmth of hope settling in his chest. But happiness rarely arrives without shadows. One evening, as Armin returned from his daily routine, he noticed a man standing at the end of the hall, a stranger in a sharp suit, ice-cold and calculating. Mr. Khan stepped forward, his voice low. "This is Mr. Shahid. He's involved in the family business," he said carefully. "He has questions." Armin's stomach tightened. Questions? About what? About him? About Hannah? He had no answers, and instinctively, he knew that this was more than a polite inquiry. Mr. Shahid's gaze lingered on him, sharp as a knife, measuring, calculating. Armin realized that wealth, as dazzling as it was, came with a scrutiny he had never faced on the streets. Every misstep could cost him far more than a few coins. Over the next week, Armin discovered the rules of this new world were far more complex than the steps of any dance. There were schedules, expectations, and invisible hierarchies. Servants whispered about him in the hallways. Staff who had once ignored him now watched his every move. And Hannah. Hannah continued to inspire him, but her health reminded him constantly of the fragility of life. One wrong move, one accident, and everything could collapse. Despite the pressure, Armin remained determined. He invented new dances, taught Hannah new moves, and began documenting their progress. Each small victory, the twitch of a finger, a smile breaking across her lips, was a triumph. But not everyone in the mansion shared his excitement. Mr. Shahid grew increasingly tense, his questions turning sharper, probing deeper. "Why does this boy have your attention, Mrs. Khan?" he asked one evening, his voice low but edged with suspicion. "Why is he spending so much time with Hannah?" "There are protocols. There are rules. Are you aware of the implications?" Mrs. Khan hesitated. He brings joy to her. "That's all that matters right now," she replied softly. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the unease that even she could not hide. Mr. Shahid's eyes narrowed. "Joy? Or influence? Children are impressionable. And so are families. Be careful, Arzu. Not everyone outside these walls has your intentions. Some will see opportunity where you see kindness." Armin overheard every word. He didn't fully understand the complexities of family politics or the unseen power struggles, but he sensed the danger. Something was brewing, an invisible tension that could sweep through their lives like a storm. And he realized that his presence, once welcomed for the happiness he brought, was now a potential threat to forces he had never imagined. Then came the night that changed everything. Armin had been helping Hannah with a new routine, her hands moving slowly but confidently. A sudden crash echoed from the main hall, followed by muffled voices, raised in alarm. Armin froze. Something was wrong. He ran toward the noise, Hannah calling after him weakly. What he saw made his heart pound like never before. Mr. Shahid stood over a servant, arguing fiercely. Words were sharp, faces red with anger. But then, Armin noticed something chilling, a small envelope on the floor, stamped with the family seal, marked in bold letters, "Confidential." The servant tried to pick it up, but Mr. Shahid snatched it first, glancing around nervously. Armin's curiosity, that same boldness that had driven him onto the mansion floor to dance, surged. He edged closer, trying to see what the envelope contained. But a sharp voice stopped him.
"What are you doing, boy?"
Mr. Khan's command startled him. The tension in the room was palpable. Every second felt like a test, and Arman realized he had just stumbled into a world far more dangerous than he had imagined. That night, as Arman lay on his small bed, staring at the ceiling, questions swirled in his mind.
What was in the envelope?
Why had it caused such anger? And most importantly, was he in danger simply for being here, for dancing, for daring to bring light to someone who had been living in darkness? Outside, the city lights blinked in the distance, unaware of the storm building inside the mansion. And Arman, a boy who had stepped into a world of wealth and power with nothing but courage and talent, knew deep down that his life was about to change forever. The morning sunlight fell unevenly across the mansion, cutting through the tall windows in golden strips that highlighted every speck of dust floating in the air. Arman sat quietly at the edge of his small bed, replaying the previous night's events over and over.
That envelope, something about it had made even Mr. Khan uneasy.
And Mr. Shahid's eyes, cold, calculating, dangerous, had followed him with an intensity that made his chest tighten.
He knew he could not ignore it.
Curiosity, that dangerous yet unyielding spark inside him, had always led him into trouble and sometimes into miracles. And now, it called louder than ever. He glanced at Hannah, who slept peacefully in her room, the faint glow of her bedside lamp casting a soft halo around her face. She was vulnerable, fragile, and yet, in her own way, fierce. And Arman realized that whatever lay in the mansion's shadows could threaten her as much as it could threaten him. Quietly, he rose and tiptoed through the hallway, trying not to wake anyone. The mansion, for all its beauty, was a labyrinth of secrets, rooms filled with art, hidden corridors, staff quarters tucked behind walls, and doors that seemed to lead nowhere. He had explored only a fraction, but already he had learned that every hallway, every painting, every locked door might hold a story or a threat. He reached the main hall, where Mr. Shahid had argued the night before. His eyes scanned the floor, and then he saw it, the envelope, forgotten for a moment on a small table by the staircase. Heart pounding, Arman approached cautiously. He bent down and carefully picked it up, feeling the weight of secrecy in his small hands. The seal was crisp, official, and forbidding. With trembling fingers, he opened it. Inside was a stack of papers, documents with numbers, names, and instructions. Arman did not understand all the legal jargon, but one phrase jumped out at him: immediate financial intervention required. Unauthorized influence may cause irreparable damage. His stomach twisted.
Influence? Was this about him? About Hannah?
Something inside him whispered that the envelope held more than numbers, it held power, and power could be dangerous. Before he could read further, a shadow fell across the papers. He looked up to see Mr. Shahid, eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. "I see curiosity runs in you," he said coldly.
Not a good trait in this mansion.
Arman froze, the papers clutched to his chest. He had been caught. I he stammered, but Mr. Shahid's glare stopped him mid-sentence. "You don't understand," Mr. Shahid continued, his voice low and threatening.
"These are not toys. These are lives. Decisions made here can ruin families, fortunes, and futures.
You, boy, have stepped into a world far beyond your understanding."
Arman's mind raced.
He could feel his small hands trembling, but his resolve hardened. "I just want to make sure she's safe," he said, nodding toward Hannah's room.
"I didn't mean to."
Mr. Shahid's eyes flickered with something harder to read, an edge of calculation.
"Safety? You think you understand safety? You are a guest in this house. Remember that. Every action has consequences. Every choice is watched."
He turned sharply and walked away, leaving Arman alone with the envelope and a growing sense of dread. Later that day, Arman returned to Hannah, trying to hide the anxiety knotting his stomach. She looked up at him, her eyes bright, her small face full of trust. "Did you see?" she whispered, pointing to her hands, which she had moved more fluidly than yesterday.
I can move more."
Arman smiled, kneeling beside her.
"Yes, Hannah."
"You're amazing," he said, and for a moment, the mansion felt less like a cage and more like a stage where miracles were possible. He knew, though, that the miracle came with risks. There were forces he could not yet see, people whose intentions were hidden, and secrets that could explode at any moment. That night, Armin lay awake, the envelope hidden under his pillow. He could hear voices, low, tense murmurs from the adults in the mansion. Words like risk, influence, and intervention floated through the corridors. He realized the world of wealth and power was nothing like the streets he knew. Decisions were made in whispers, threats were veiled in politeness, and danger could come from anyone. But Armin was not one to back down. He had survived the streets, the teasing, the hunger, and the cold nights. And now, he would survive here. If that meant uncovering the mansion's secrets, facing threats he barely understood, and protecting Hannah at all costs, then he would do it. Days passed, each one building tension. Armin's bond with Hannah deepened, and through her, he began to notice cracks in the mansion's polished exterior. Servants exchanged nervous glances. Staff who had once been obedient now whispered in corners. Even Mr. Khan, usually composed and distant, seemed distracted, his mind occupied with matters beyond his family's immediate concern. Then came the moment that changed everything. Armin was walking through the back corridor, heading to Hannah's room, when he noticed a faint light under a door he had never seen open. Curiosity, stronger than caution, pulled him forward. He pressed his ear to the door. Inside, he heard hushed voices. Mr. Shahid was speaking, his tone sharp and urgent. "We cannot let this continue. The boy's influence is spreading. The girl, she's growing stronger. If the father notices, it could complicate everything. We must act before it's too late." Armin's heart stopped. Influence? Growing stronger? What did they mean? And the way they spoke, it was clear, even to him, that whatever they were planning was dangerous. He had stumbled into something far beyond dancing and laughter. He had entered a web of power, secrecy, and threats that could engulf everyone he cared about. Hannah's face flashed in his mind. He could not let them hurt her. Not her. Not now, when she was beginning to move, beginning to smile, beginning to live. He realized that his courage, the same courage that had brought him to dance in front of strangers, would now be tested in ways he had never imagined. But even as fear gnawed at him, a spark of determination ignited. He would not run. He would not hide. He would find a way to protect Hannah, to stand up against forces far bigger than himself. The question was, how? And more importantly, who could he trust? Outside, the city lights blinked silently. The mansion's walls were beautiful, elegant, and treacherous. And Armin, a poor boy who had dared to dance, knew that the next steps he took would not just determine his own fate but Hannah's. The night was unusually quiet, the mansion bathed in silver moonlight that filtered through the high windows. Armin lay awake, eyes wide, mind racing. The words he had overheard earlier, "the boy's influence is spreading," echoed relentlessly in his head. Influence? He was just a boy. He had danced, he had smiled, he had brought Hannah's laughter back, but was that really dangerous? Apparently, it was. He knew he could not wait. If Mr. Shahid had plans that could hurt Hannah, he needed to act. Armin slid quietly from his bed, careful not to wake the other staff who were asleep nearby. The envelope, still hidden under his pillow, felt heavier now, as if it contained the weight of the entire mansion's secrets. Stepping into the hallway, he noticed shadows flickering along the walls. The mansion felt different at night. The polished floors reflected the moonlight like a glassy lake, but there was an unease in the air, a subtle warning that danger was near. Armin's heart thumped, but he pressed on. He moved toward the back corridor where he had overheard Mr. Shahid's conversation. His small hands clenched into fists. He did not know what he would do when he found out the truth, but he knew he could not let fear stop him. Hannah's laughter, her fragile smile, and her tentative movements were worth any risk. When he reached the door, he noticed it was slightly ajar this time. Peering inside, he saw papers scattered across a desk, a faint glow from a lamp illuminating a complex network of documents, charts, and photographs. Armin realized immediately that this was no ordinary business planning, this was a blueprint of control, influence, and hidden manipulation. Names of people, banks, organizations, and even charities were listed, connected with lines like threads in a spider's web. Suddenly, he heard footsteps. He froze. The door creaked slightly, and Mr. Shahid entered the room, his eyes scanning the papers with sharp precision. Arman pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath, praying he would not be discovered.
Mr. Shahid spoke in a low, urgent tone. Everything must be done before the father notices.
If this boy continues to stay, he could ruin everything. That child, the girl, she is becoming stronger, more independent.
And that boy is teaching her. I cannot risk it. She must be controlled. Arman's blood ran cold. Controlled?
His stomach twisted. This wasn't just about influence, it was about taking away Hannah's freedom, her smile, the small spark of life she had regained.
He could not let them do that. He had to act. But how? He was just a boy.
He had no power, no authority, no allies beyond Hannah herself. And yet, the courage that had carried him onto the mansion floor to dance surged again. He would not let fear dictate his choices. He had faced the streets, hunger, and danger before. He could face this too. The next morning, Arman returned to Hannah with a sense of purpose. She was waiting, her eyes bright and full of trust.
Arman, did you dream about dancing again? She asked, smiling.
Her voice, fragile yet hopeful, strengthened his resolve. He knelt beside her, gripping her small hand.
Yes, Hannah. But we have to be careful now. There are people who don't want you to grow, who don't want you to smile. But I promise. I will protect you. Hannah's eyes widened. Protect me?
How? She asked, her voice trembling. Arman hesitated, unsure how to explain the danger without frightening her.
We'll find a way. Together. You and I, he said finally, his voice firm.
She nodded, placing her small hand over his. That simple gesture, the trust of a child, gave him strength he did not know he had. But the mansion's walls were not empty.
Whispers followed him through corridors.
Eyes watched from hidden corners. Even Mr. Khan, who had once seemed distant, began to notice small things: books moved, letters missing, a strange sense that someone was quietly working against the household's plans.
Then came the turning point.
One afternoon, as Arman guided Hannah through a new dance exercise, a servant rushed in, whispering urgently.
Sir, there's someone asking for the boy. He says it's urgent. Outside the gates. Arman's stomach dropped. Someone outside the mansion? Was it a friend? An enemy? Or worse, someone sent by Mr. Shahid? He had to think fast.
Hannah, stay here, he whispered, trying to sound calm.
I'll be back in a moment.
He slipped out into the driveway, the afternoon sun glaring down. At the gate stood a man in a simple uniform, holding a small package. His face was partially hidden, but his eyes were sharp and alert.
Are you Arman? The man asked.
Yes,
Arman replied cautiously. Who sent you?
The man glanced around, then leaned closer.
I work for someone who wants to help. But you must be careful. The mansion, it's not what it seems. You're in danger.
The boy who dances brings hope, but hope can threaten those who fear it.
Arman's mind reeled. Help? Danger? Who could he trust? Every instinct screamed that this was no coincidence.
Someone knew about him, about Hannah, about the hidden threats he had just begun to uncover. And that someone was reaching out, giving him a choice, a risk that could either save them or destroy everything. Arman took the package and opened it carefully. Inside was a small notebook, filled with sketches of the mansion, notes on Mr. Shahid's movements, and observations of the staff.
Someone had been watching, recording, waiting for the right moment to intervene. A plan. A guide. A lifeline. The boy's heart pounded. He realized that he could no longer act blindly. He had allies, secret knowledge, and courage, but he also had enemies who were patient, powerful, and dangerous. Every step he took from now on would be critical. Back inside, Hannah looked up at him, sensing the weight of his thoughts. What is it? She asked softly.
Armin knelt beside her, gripping her hand.
It's complicated, he said, choosing his words carefully. But we have a choice. We can stand together, and maybe, just maybe, we can change everything.
And in that moment, the mansion, for all its grandeur, no longer felt untouchable. Secrets hid in its walls, dangers lurked in its shadows, but Armin had found a spark that could ignite hope, courage, and a fight for freedom. The next morning, the mansion was alive with a strange tension. Even the sunlight seemed hesitant, filtering softly through the tall windows as if unsure what it would reveal. Armin stood near Hannah's room, notebook clutched tightly in his hands. The sketches, the notes, the hidden observations, they were his only advantage against forces he barely understood, yet he felt a growing confidence. He had courage. He had purpose. And now, he had knowledge. "Hannah," he whispered, kneeling beside her wheelchair, "we need to be careful. There are people here who won't let you be happy, who want to control everything." Hannah's small hands clenched his. "Then we fight," she said simply, her eyes shining with a determination far beyond her years.
Armin blinked.
For a moment, he forgot her fragility, her body trapped by illness. Here was a spirit untamed, a heart that refused to be caged. He felt a rush of protectiveness stronger than ever. They spent the morning practicing new movements, exercises designed to help Hannah strengthen her small muscles, to push her just beyond the limits she thought were permanent. And all the while, Armin's mind worked. He studied the mansion's maps, memorized staff schedules, and considered every route that Mr. Shahid might use to influence or threaten them.
By afternoon, his first test arrived.
A messenger from the staff appeared, whispering urgently, "Mr. Shahid wants to see you."
Alone. Armin's stomach tightened. Alone? That was exactly what he feared. He nodded slowly, hiding the notebook beneath his shirt.
Every instinct screamed danger, but he had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, it was moving forward despite it.
He followed the messenger down a long corridor, the walls lined with portraits of the Khan family's ancestors. Their eyes seemed to watch him, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama.
At the end of the hall, a door opened to a private study. Mr. Shahid was there, his sharp eyes fixed on him. "You've been busy," Mr. Shahid said, voice calm but edged with warning.
"Learning things, observing things, things you shouldn't."
I don't know what you mean," Armin replied cautiously, though his fingers itched to protect Hannah and reveal the truth. Mr. Shahid's gaze sharpened.
"Don't play games, boy. I know you've been snooping, listening, taking notes.
You may be brave, but courage without caution is dangerous."
Armin swallowed hard. He knew the power dynamics were unequal, yet he refused to back down.
"I'm not afraid," he said quietly.
"I just want to make sure she's safe."
For a moment, Mr. Shahid studied him, his expression unreadable.
Then he leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk forming. "Interesting. Most would cower. But you're different. I can see why she listens to you. But be warned, this mansion is not a playground. You step too far, and the consequences are yours alone." Armin felt a chill.
The warning was clear, but also revealing.
Mr. Shahid believed Armin could influence Hannah.
And if influence was dangerous in their eyes, then their fear could become a weapon. He had to act carefully, but he had to act. When he returned to Hannah, he found her smiling, her hands moving in a small, controlled twirl.
"Did he say anything?" she asked.
"Yes," Armin replied, kneeling beside her.
"He's aware.
He knows we're working together. We have to be smarter, faster.
But we will not let fear stop us." That evening, the first real confrontation occurred.
Armin noticed subtle changes in the mansion's routine, a staff member lingering suspiciously near Hannah's room, another slipping notes under doors, and shadows moving where they shouldn't. His instincts screamed that something immediate was coming. He decided to act. Using the notebook and the observations he had collected, he devised a simple but bold plan. He would confront the threat indirectly, gather evidence, predict Mr. Shahid's movements, and protect Hannah while showing the adults the truth without revealing his full strategy. Late that night, Armin crept through the corridors with Hannah's small hand guiding him. She had insisted on helping, refusing to be sidelined. Together, they moved silently, avoiding the hallways where staff or guards might appear. They reached the room where Mr. Shahid often worked late, the door slightly ajar. Peeking inside, Arman saw a stack of documents, similar to the envelope he had found before, detailing plans to restrict Hannah's therapy, control her schedule, and manipulate her development. Mr. Shahid and a few staff members were discussing the plans in hushed tones. Arman's blood ran cold. This was worse than he imagined. They weren't just worried about influence, they were planning to actively control her life, limit her freedom, and erase the progress she had made. He glanced at Hannah. "We have to stop this," he whispered. "Do you trust me?" "Yes," she said firmly, squeezing his hand. With that, Arman made a daring decision. He would not simply observe. He would expose the plan. Using the notebook and his memory of the mansion's layout, he quietly slipped the documents out and hid them in his room, intending to reveal them at the right moment to Mr. Khan and Mrs. Khan. But he knew that if he was caught, the consequences could be immediate and severe. As they turned to leave, a sudden creak froze them. Mr. Shahid had noticed. His eyes locked on them with sharp intensity. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice slicing through the silent night. Arman's heart raced. There was no turning back now. He clenched Hannah's hand, his mind racing for a solution. Could a poor boy and a paralyzed girl outsmart a powerful man who would do anything to maintain control? The room seemed to shrink around them, shadows pressing closer, danger encroaching from every corner. Arman's courage surged. He stepped forward, eyes blazing. "I'm not afraid," he said firmly. "And we won't let you control her life." Mr. Shahid's smirk vanished, replaced by a dangerous glare. "You are very bold, boy. Bold and foolish." The moment hung in the air, tense and fragile, as if the entire mansion itself were holding its breath. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, a storm approaching both literal and metaphorical. Arman realized this was only the first confrontation. There would be more, bigger challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. For Hannah. For courage. For hope. And as they stared at each other, the first true battle of wits, courage, and will had begun. The mansion was quiet before dawn, but the silence was heavy with anticipation. Arman woke early, heart pounding, knowing that today would decide everything. The notebook, filled with sketches, notes, and secret observations, lay beside him like a trusted companion. It had guided him through shadows, taught him patience, and now would help him turn courage into action. Hannah stirred in her wheelchair, her eyes bright, filled with trust and determination. "Are we ready?" she whispered. Arman smiled, kneeling beside her. "Yes. Today, we finish this, together." The plan was simple but dangerous. Using the evidence he had secretly collected, the documents showing Mr. Shahid's manipulations, his attempts to control Hannah's life, and the hidden agendas, Arman would expose the truth to Mr. Khan and Mrs. Khan. But he also knew he could not do it alone. Hannah's presence, her voice, and her courage were equally critical. They had to confront not just deception, but a system that had underestimated their strength. As the morning sun streamed through the mansion's windows, Arman wheeled Hannah toward the grand hall. Staff watched curiously, sensing that something important was about to happen. He placed the documents on a polished table and waited, heartbeat echoing in the cavernous space. Moments later, Mr. Khan and Mrs. Khan entered, their expressions shifting from surprise to concern as they noticed the tension in Arman's stance. Hannah's small voice rang out clearly, cutting through the quiet. "They were trying to stop me, to control me. But Arman helped me. He showed me that I can be free." Arman took a deep breath. "These papers show everything, sir. Plans to limit Hannah's progress, control her therapy, and manipulate the household. I'm just a boy, but I couldn't let this happen. We can't let her be trapped." Mr. Khan took the documents, his brow furrowed as he read. His eyes shifted between Arman and Hannah, realization dawning slowly. I didn't know," he said softly, a rare vulnerability breaking through his usual composure. "This changes everything." Mrs. Khan stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes. Armin, you risked so much to protect her.
Thank you. She glanced at Hannah, whose small face radiated joy and relief. You've given her hope, and reminded us what's truly important. In the corner, Mr. Shahid's expression darkened, but he found himself powerless in the face of truth and courage. His plans were exposed, his influence shattered, and the moral weight of the household aligned against him. There was no room for deception anymore. For the first time in months, Hannah's laughter rang freely through the mansion. She clapped her hands, moved her small arms in a celebratory twirl, and even Armin allowed himself a small smile. The bond between them, forged through fear, courage, and trust, had transformed both their lives. Over the next days, the household changed. Mr. Khan and Mrs. Khan implemented reforms, ensuring Hannah's therapy continued without interference. Staff who had been complicit in secrecy were reassigned, and Mr. Shahid faced consequences for his manipulations. And Armin.
Armin became more than a boy who danced. He became a symbol of courage, integrity, and the power of one small act to inspire change.
Hannah continued to grow stronger each day.
Her movements improved, her laughter became more frequent, and her world expanded beyond the limits that once bound her. Armin remained by her side, teaching, guiding, and celebrating every small victory. Together, they discovered that hope, bravery, and trust could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. And in the quiet moments, when the mansion was still and the golden sunlight streamed through the tall windows, Armin would reflect on how far he had come. A poor boy from the streets, who once danced for coins, had changed the life of a little girl and had, in turn, changed the hearts of those who thought power was the only truth. It was a lesson he would never forget. Courage is not measured by wealth, strength, or status, it is measured by the willingness to stand up for what is right, even when the odds are against you. And sometimes, the smallest dance can create the largest ripples in the world. Armin glanced at Hannah, whose eyes sparkled with a mixture of mischief and triumph. Ready for the next dance? He asked. She giggled, clapping her hands.
Always. And as the sunlight filled the mansion, a boy and a girl danced, not for money, not for approval, but for life, for freedom, and for the unbreakable bond that had grown between them. They had faced shadows, danger, and deception, and together, they had emerged stronger, proving that hope and courage could triumph, no matter how impossible the odds. The moral was clear: even in the face of power, wealth, and control, one small act of bravery can change lives, and one courageous heart can inspire countless others.